Okay, let's unpack this. Today we are pushing off from the banks of the familiar, turning our vessel into a stretch of water that feels both ancient and terrifyingly current.
It really does.
We are heading into the heart of something profound, unsettling, and just tragically real. Joseph Conrad's masterpiece, Heart of Darkness.
And this is a crucial deep dive for you. The source material we've gathered, it goes far beyond the standard literary critiques you might find.
Right.
It incorporates Conrad's own brief traumatic biography, and maybe most importantly, it centers on the horrifying, verifiable history of the place that inspired it.
The Congo Free State.
The Congo Free State under King Leopold II. Yeah.
So our mission today, it isn't just to talk about a classic novel you might have read in school.
No, not at all.
Our goal is to really extract the most potent insights, moving past the simple allegories to grapple with its historical trauma and the devastating psychological truth it reveals. We want to understand what makes this story, written way back in 1899, feel so immediate, so terrifyingly relevant to how power and profit operate right now.
Well, it forces us to confront the origins of, modern institutional cruelty. We have to look at the blueprint this book provides for understanding how idealism can be weaponized.
Weaponized, that's a good word for it.
And how ordinary men, when they're given absolute power and, frankly, absolute greed, they dismantle their own moral structure completely.
And the reason you should care, the one sentence that really gets to the heart of this work and justifies its place in the canon is this. This novel is the eyewitness account of a Holocaust that killed 10 million people, a journey to find a man who became a god, and the terrifying discovery that the monster all along is us.
That is the core, unvarnished truth of it. And it's a claim that requires us to understand the colossal scale of the atrocity Conrad was documenting, even if it was allegorically. We're discussing a book that's rooted in one of the most cynical, lethal, and economically successful diplomatic maneuvers of the 19th century.
The brutal exploitation of the Congo Basin.
Precisely.
So our sources describe Heart of Darkness not so much as a historical novel, but as a prediction, maybe, or a documentation in real time of society's capacity for cruelty.
For institutionalized cruelty and for this profound moral evasion, it doesn't just show evil, it shows the system designed to make that evil profitable.
And psychologically palatable.
And palatable, yes, to the men running it. It sets up a timeless blueprint for understanding how greed and abstraction can turn ordinary, ambitious men into monsters.
This isn't just history, is it? It's a mechanism of human nature.
It absolutely is. It forces you, the listener, to confront this vast, ugly gap between the noble rhetoric of progress and civilization and trade and the savage, profit-driven reality of murder and mutilation.
And what makes it so controversial, so enduring, is that Conrad chose to focus on the psychological impact of that cruelty.
Yeah.
On the man who witnesses it, Marlow, and the man who embodies it, Kurtz. He didn't just write a political tract.
No, and that was the genius of it. He showed us that the darkness is portable. It wasn't something inherent to the African jungle or the people there.
Right, it wasn't the place.
It was a capacity for savagery that the quote-unquote civilized European enterprise dragged right along with it.
And that idea that civilization is just this thin, fragile layer.
Yeah.
And that the savage heart beats within the European man. I mean, that message is still eternally relevant and profoundly uncomfortable.
Even today.
Especially today. Okay, so let's start with the narrative structure because it's part of the genius.
It is.
The story is framed on the tranquil waters of the Thames River aboard a little boat called the Nelly. This sailor, Charles Marlow, is waiting for the tide to turn.
And that creates this sense of timeless suspension, right?
Exactly. He looks at the Thames, and he doesn't just see a busy waterway. He sees it as a time machine, imagining Roman galleys invading a savage ancient Britain thousands of years ago.
That framing is just. It's essential. Marlow suggests that even England, the heart of the great empire, was once a dark place. He gets it.
He gets it.
He understands that all rivers, if you follow them far enough upstream, they lead back to the primal past. And he's about to take his listeners and us on a psychological time warp.
To show us just how thin that line is.
How thin the line is between what we call civilization and savagery.
So Marlow's personal motivation is driven by this childhood obsession, a fascination with the last blank spaces on the map.
The unknown places.
Yep. And he manages to secure a job through his aunt, who is well-meaning but completely naive, with a trading company based in Brussels.
And Brussels, the center of this grand European project, he immediately describes with this incredible, piercing irony as a whited sepulcher.
I mean, think about that biblical implication.
It's perfect, beautiful, pure, flawlessly clean on the outside.
But inside, it's just death, rot, decaying bones. This image instantly sets the tone for the entire book.
The entire colonial enterprise is built on a magnificent, deadly lie. A beautiful veneer masking a core of absolute corruption.
So the atmosphere inside the company offices is just deeply unsettling. It's almost funereal.
Yeah.
Marlow walks through these silent corridors, and the only sound is the clatter of his own shoes. He finds two women sitting there, silently knitting black wool, one young, one old.
And they strike him with the force of myth, don't they?
Totally. They seem like the ancient fates, weaving a shroud or maybe guarding the door to the darkness that's waiting for the men who go out there.
And the irony just gets deeper when he signs his contract. It's a solemn vow not to reveal trade secrets.
Trade secret.
This commitment to silence, this insistence on secrecy about the economic process. It's just dripping with a devastating irony that he won't fully get until he sees what those secrets actually are.
Human degradation. Murder.
Exactly.
And then comes the medical examination,
Yeah.
which is one of the most chilling foreshadowing scenes in all of literature.
So strange.
An old doctor measures Marlow's skull with his clinical detachment. He's not checking his physical health or giving him shots. He's interested in the psychological changes that the continent will inflict on his mind.
The doctor, who says he's an amateur anthropologist, warns Marlow with this sort of chilling scientific curiosity. He says that few men come back psychologically whole.
He signals right away that this journey is going to be internal. It's not a test of strength. It's a test of sanity and morality.
Yeah.
And all of this elaborate, unsettling buildup, it's all predicated on one single figure, Mr. Kurtz.
Kurtz.
Marlow is tasked with traveling upriver to find and maybe relieve this man. And Kurtz is the company's absolute prodigy, the ultimate success story.
He's lauded as an emissary of pity, science, and progress, a man of the highest ideals.
And the output he sends back is just astronomical. He secures more ivory than all the other agents combined. He's spoken of as a genius, this remarkable person who is meant to just fly up the corporate ladder.
But the truly magnetic detail about Kurtz, the thing that compels Marlow before he even sees the man.
It's his voice.
It's his voice. He's known throughout the territory as a brilliant, persuasive, captivating voice.
So the quest upriver, it becomes not just a commercial challenge, but a profound psychological quest to meet this enigma, this solitary genius at the edge of the world.
To understand the source of his astonishing, almost mythic success, Marlow is just pulled forward by the mystery of the man and the power of his words.
Okay, so from here on out, we're in spoiler territory. So if you haven't read the book, this is your chance to pause.
It's worth the read first, but we'll walk you through it.
So Marlow's actual arrival in Africa is just a brutal plunge into absurdity and cruelty. He's dropped off on this coast of roaring surf, and the first thing he sees is a French man-of-war firing its massive guns into the impenetrable continent.
And the shelling is utterly pointless. I mean, the shells just explode harmlessly against the greenery. They're aimed at an unseen, unheard enemy.
It's pure abstract aggression.
It is. It symbolizes the sheer madness and futility of the whole colonial enterprise. It's just power exerted for the sake of power, achieving nothing but noise and confusion.
So when he lands at the outer station, the decay is immediate. There's rusting machinery, pipes, rail lines scattered everywhere. It's a physical testament to a failing project.
But the real wreckage is human.
The real wreckage is human. Marlow nearly trips over these emaciated African prisoners in a chain gang, their bodies skeletal, ribs visible, linked by metal collars.
And this methodical cruelty, this is the true engine of the operation. He then stumbles upon what he calls the Grove of Death.
Yeah.
A shady spot where laborers who have been worked past human endurance and just left to crawl away and die are quietly and efficiently expiring. It's symptomatic suffering.
The quietness of it makes it more horrifying.
So much more. It's not loud. It's just happening.
And it is here that we meet one of the most significant symbolic characters, the chief accountant. Amidst all this death, we find a man dressed in pristine white linens, meticulously obsessed with his figures. He is the symbol of cold, detached bureaucracy.
He's immune to the horror. In fact, he complains about the groans of a dying man nearby because it's distracting him from his sacred duty of bookkeeping.
And that detachment, that prioritization of abstract profit over human life, is a perfect symbol of the systemic moral blindness that lets this horror function.
The man in the cleanest clothes is complicit in the dirtiest deeds, all because he refuses to look up from his ledger.
From there, the journey to the central station is a nightmare of delay. Marlow finds his steamboat is sunk.
Probably sabotaged.
Oh, almost certainly. And this forces him to be stranded for months waiting for parts. And that delay is psychologically significant. It just immerses him deeper in this atmosphere of conspiracy and stagnation.
And here we're introduced to the manager, a man who's remarkable only for his emptiness, his lack of initiative, and his strange ability to survive any crisis.
And his cronies, the agents and workers he calls the faithless pilgrims.
The hollow men.
Yes, exactly. They're carrying these long staves, preoccupied by petty ambition, gossiping endlessly about Ivory and plotting Kurtz's supposed madness and downfall.
Their jealousy of Kurtz's success is the only thing that gives their lives any shape.
So finally, the real journey begins. The voyage up the Serpentine River is agonizingly slow, deep, and dreamlike.
The river itself acts as a living character, a time machine, pulling them away from the known, away from all civilizing influence.
And the jungle becomes this vast, ancient, monolithic wall, and Marlow feels a profound psychological unraveling. He feels a sense that the wilderness is literally watching him, judging his fragility, and, most disturbingly, offering him this strange primal kinship.
And that final approach is just defined by chaos and moral uncertainty. The thick, white fog descends, trapping them in an environment where sight is useless.
That fog is such a profound symbol.
It's a physical manifestation of the willful ignorance, the moral blindness, the evasion that defines the entire colonial operation. Evil thrives in that opaque, silent confusion.
So when the fog lifts, the boat is attacked by unseen forces from the riverbanks. It's just chaos, noise, and fear.
Yeah.
And Marlow's helmsman, the man he felt this strange, inexplicable connection with, the most real person he'd met on the river, is killed by a spear. His blood stains Marlow's shoes.
The silence after that attack, when Marlow uses the steam whistle to scatter the assailants, is just. It's profound. It's a moment of terrible realization for Marlow.
His only connection is gone.
The only thing tethering him to the human experience of the place is severed.
So upon arrival at the interstation, the awful, unspeakable truth is finally laid bare. The first shocking sight is the line of fence posts surrounding Kurtz's compound.
And each one is topped with a severed human head facing inward.
Inward.
This confirms the worst rumors. The wilderness hadn't just been conquered by Kurtz, it had claimed him entirely. It answered and amplified his own deepest, most monstrous passions.
And Marlow meets this young Russian disciple, a man in patched rags who's completely devoted to Kurtz.
It's a harlequin.
Yes. And he confirms that Kurtz has become a living god to the local people, ruling through terror, practicing unspeakable rites.
Rituals that Marlow only hints at, suggesting a complete collapse of morality and a reversion to pure, primal impulse.
When Marlow finally meets Kurtz, the man is skeletal, emaciated, withered by fever, lying on his deathbed.
By his voice.
His voice is still magnificent, eloquent, commanding.
Yeah.
And Marlow realizes that Kurtz, when given absolute power and stripped of all societal restraints, he had no inner check. His highest ideals, the lofty rhetoric of civilization, were just consumed by his primitive desires.
And Kurtz entrusts Marlow with his papers, right? Including this eloquently written report on the suppression of savage customs.
It starts with these brilliant, beautiful ideas about upliftment and compassion.
But across the bottom, scrawled in a moment of terrifying lucidity, is the handwritten postscript. Exterminate all the brutes.
A perfect juxtaposition of civilization and absolute savagery in one terrifying document.
So the journey back downriver is a slow death march. As Kurtz lies dying in the dark cabin, tormented by fever, he achieves a moment of terrible, profound, absolute clarity.
He's not staring into the darkness of the jungle. He's staring into the abyss of his own soul, at the acts he committed and the ideals he betrayed.
In that moment, he passes judgment on himself, on his life, on the system that enabled him, and on humanity itself. He whispers his famous, cryptic last words.
The horror, the horror.
And we have to understand this not as a cry of physical fear, but as a devastating final moral verdict on the profound evil that his magnificent voice had served. He recognizes the damnation of his own soul.
Marlow survives the journey, but he returns to Brussels, the sepulchral city, and he sees everyone as phantoms. He's unable to connect with their trivial, petty concerns.
He's haunted.
He is forever changed.
And the moral climax of the book arrives when he visits Kurtz's fiancée, his intended, a yen later. She lives in this world of noble illusion.
She sanctified Kurtz in her memory as a saintly figure, an agent of progress. And she begs him for Kurtz's last words, expecting some tribute to his goodness or their love.
And Marlow realizes he can't. He must not shatter her necessary illusion. He can't plunge her into that abyss of absolute unmitigated moral truth.
So he lies.
He lies.
He tells her Kurtz's last word was her name.
And this lie is the core philosophical moment. It suggests that civilization itself is a fragile, necessary deception, a shield we collectively maintain to keep the overwhelming, terrible darkness and the brutal truth of the human heart at bay.
Wow. So to appreciate that visceral, gut-wrenching intensity, we have to understand the man who poured his own trauma onto the page.
Absolutely. Joseph Conrad's life was steeped in political trauma and personal loss from his earliest years. He was born Joseph Theodor Conrad Korzenowski in modern-day Ukraine.
And his parents were aristocratic Polish political activists, right? Intensely dedicated to plotting against Russian imperial rule.
And that political idealism came at a terrible price. Both of his parents were arrested and exiled. They died when Conrad was just a boy, leaving him orphaned.
So he was fundamentally shaped by this concept of lofty ideals, leading to deep personal suffering and loss.
That early trauma of exile and loss and the failure of idealistic missions, it certainly informed his perpetually skeptical worldview. Seeking escape, he went to sea as a teenager.
He spent 2 decades as a merchant marine, achieving the rank of captain. And the sea provided him with the material and the solitary introspection that formed the backdrop for nearly all his great works.
He was a man of the world's edges. He knew isolation, he knew resourcefulness, and he knew the moral ambiguities you find far from the rule of law.
But the journey that shattered him was in 1890. He was 32, and he fulfilled this specific romantic childhood dream to captain a steamboat on the Congo River.
He was so drawn to the romance of it, the great rivers leading into the heart of the unknown. And that experience, which only lasted a few short months, it just shattered his romantic worldview completely.
He contracted severe dysentery and malaria, illnesses that physically broke his health for the rest of his life.
But the psychological wounds were far deeper. He witnessed a system of exploitation so cynical, so brutally efficient, that it fundamentally changed his view of humanity and Europe's self-proclaimed civilizing mission.
And it's fascinating how closely his reality mirrored Marlow's fiction. Conrad's actual assignment was to relieve the station agent at Stanley Falls, a man named Georges Antoine Klein. And Klein, who was gravely ill when Conrad found him, died on the journey back downriver, just like Kurtz.
The irony in the names is almost too perfect to be fiction. Georges Antoine Klein, which means small in German.
Right.
He was the real-life inspiration for the massive, towering mythological figure of Kurtz, whose name actually means short. It highlights how Conrad took a small, tragic reality and just inflated it into a mythic figure who embodies the terrifying potential of unleashed evil.
So Heart of Darkness, which was finally published almost 10 years after his return, it wasn't written for commerce or adventure.
No, it was written to process this immense toxic trauma. It was an act of bearing witness, a desperate attempt to exorcise the mental ghosts of what he saw.
And our sources confirmed that every specific visceral detail Marlow observes, from the starving chain gangs, the pointless blasting of the cliff face, the atmosphere of silent conspiracy.
All of it. The immediate, staggering greed of the agents. It's all drawn directly from Conrad's personal observations in 1890. He wasn't inventing a nightmare. He was painstakingly chronicling the one he lived through.
This book sits in his career not as a simple adventure story, but as the crucible. It's the moment where his romantic vision of the world went to die.
And it transformed him from a sailor who wrote engaging stories into one of the most profound, unsettling psychological novelists of the 20th century.
So if we divorce this novel from its historical context, we are missing the absolute gravity of the story. The phrase Holocaust that killed 10 million people is not hyperbole.
Not at all. We have to understand the absolute cynicism that underpins the setting. The Congo of 1890 was not a traditional colony of Belgium.
Right. It was the vast personal property of one man, King Leopold II of Belgium.
He owned it as a private estate, an area 76 times the size of Belgium itself. And that distinction is vital because it meant he had virtually no governmental oversight or accountability.
Leopold was a genius of public relations. He ran one of the most successful and lethal global scams in history.
He did. At the 1884 Berlin Conference, he convinced Europe's great powers and the United States to grant him trusteeship over the entire Congo basin. And he presented himself as this benevolent philanthropist.
He claimed his mission was purely humanitarian, bringing civilization, Christianity, and free trade to the African people.
He founded the International Association of the Congo to promote these noble ideals. And this was the noble rhetoric, the beautiful lie, that Marlow's aunt echoed so naively in Brussels.
Describing the agents as emissaries of love.
Exactly.
But the truth, the savage reality was immediately and devastatingly clear once he had control.
Leopold ran the Congo Free State not as a governing body, but as a massive, privately owned slave plantation, focused ruthlessly and solely on extracting wealth, primarily through wild rubber and ivory.
This was industrial-scale exploitation without a moral compass. Because Leopold had zero oversight, he could create a system where absolute cruelty was the most efficient economic policy.
And the barbarism of the system was documented. It was an atrocity documented by contemporary observers, missionaries, shipping clerks.
Villages were given impossible quotas for rubber collection. The process was physically brutal, requiring men to go deep into the jungle, often for weeks, risking their lives, just to meet the demanded weight.
And failure to meet the quota resulted in immediate, terrible consequences.
To enforce these impossible quotas, Leopold's private army, the force public, was authorized to raid homes, taking women and children hostage.
They were kept in brutal conditions, often starving, until the quota was delivered. They were literally held for ransom, with rubber as the currency.
And the ultimate horrifying punishment for failure, or for perceived insubordination, was swift and standardized.
Mutilation.
Specifically, the severing of hands. This became the sick, defining feature of the Free State.
And our sources highlight this sickening bureaucratic detail. The soldiers of the force public were required to collect severed hands in baskets to prove they hadn't wasted their valuable, expensive bullets on hunting.
The economics of the operation were literally measured in body parts and human suffering.
This chilling calculation of efficiency over human life is what the chief accountant embodies in the novel.
The result was a demographic catastrophe of unimaginable scale. Historians estimate that under Leopold's brutal 23-year rule, the population of the Congo was reduced by as much as 50%.
Which means the system was responsible for the claimed lives of approximately 10 million people.
10 million people.
This horrific scale transforms the novel from a simple story about one man's moral breakdown into an essential, if allegorical, eyewitness account of a large-scale, state-sanctioned atrocity. Conrad's work is just imbued with the silent suffering of millions.
So when you connect this history back to the book, the company men, the faithless pilgrims, obsessed with profitation, they aren't just fictional villains.
No, they represent a timeless blueprint for institutionalized greed, a system where the bureaucracy, personified by the chief accountant in his pristine white, remains clean and detached while sanctioning mass murder for the sake of figures and quarterly reports.
It's a terrifying window into the past that predicts exactly how modern corporate cruelty often hides behind complex supply chains and legal obfuscation.
And total institutional indifference. The horror of the Congo was systematic, sanctioned, and profitable, and Conrad saw the mechanism in action.
Okay, let's move now to the core philosophical and thematic ideas, because this is where the novel transcends its historical setting and speaks directly to you, the listener.
Right. The central overriding theme is the darkness within. Conrad makes a point of respecting the jungle for its sheer power, its ancient silence, and its vastness. He doesn't fear the primal world.
He fears the capacity for savagery that the so-called civilized men bring with them.
Exactly. Marlow's famous realization is that the darkness isn't a geographical location, but a human potentiality. It's the psychological vacuum created when all external constraints are removed.
He realizes the wilderness, far from corrupting Kurtz, simply gave him the stage and the materials he needed to express the evil that was always latent within.
Which leads directly to the theme of the veneer of civilization. The novel is a profound thought experiment. What happens when you remove a person? Even a highly intelligent, educated, idealistic person like Kurtz from society's structures.
When the laws, the oversight, the judgment of peers, the fear of consequences, when all that is gone and you're given absolute power.
Kurtz was armed with the highest ideals. His initial report was about uplifting the ignorant millions. But Conrad suggests that without the necessary external restraints, what he calls the inner check, the primitive impulses consume even men of the highest ideals.
The terrifying lesson of Kurtz is that he was unable to check himself. When he found himself ruling as a god with total authority over life and death, that beautiful lie of his noble mission collapsed instantly into pure self-gratification and destruction.
And the journey is propelled by greed and absolutism. The entire European enterprise is driven by the quest for ivory and profit, revealing a moral emptiness at its core.
The company men constantly talk of weaning those ignorant millions from their horrible ways, but their reality is chain gangs, mutilation, and murder. The sheer scale of the greed just forced a complete questioning of morality and progress.
This is the central thematic contradiction. The magnificent voice of civilization used to mask the monstrous intent of extraction and slaughter. Kurtz's fall is so profound precisely because he embraced the greed completely.
The ultimate theme, though, and maybe the most complex, is the necessary lie. The novel's final philosophical dilemma hinges entirely on the lie Marlow tells Kurtz is intended. Why does he protect her?
By protecting her noble illusion of Kurtz, Marlow chooses to protect the illusion of civilization itself. He sees that society, as we know it, relies on this fragile, comforting web of self-deceptions.
To keep the overwhelming, terrible darkness, the truth of the severed heads, and the horror of the human capacity for evil at bay.
He believes that the truth, in its absolute brutality, would be too devastating for civilization to bear. Marlow's lie is an act of moral protection,
which confirms that society is built on a collective decision to ignore certain truths to remain functional and comfortable.
And this is where the theme lands on you, the listener. If civilization is a necessary, fragile illusion, how many civilized lies do you accept every day?
How much of the brutal reality behind your consumer goods, our geopolitical systems, or history? How much do we willingly filter out or ignore just to keep our world stable and comfortable?
Marlow's decision is the ultimate indictment of a society that chooses comfortable ignorance over brutal truth.
So the power of this narrative rests entirely on the magnetic, flawed characters. Conrad creates these archetypes that resonate because their flaws are so profoundly human.
Well, let's start with Kurtz, the illuminated soul. He's the anti-hero, the ultimate tragic figure. He is both a prodigy, eloquent, artistic, brimming with high ideals, and a monster.
His genius doesn't save him. It enables his fall. It made him believe he was somehow above the rules, above the need for an inner check. The wilderness exposed that conceit.
But what makes him so significant is that, unlike every other character in the book, he achieves a moment of final, absolute clarity. He recognizes and judges his own damnation in those final words. That moment of self-knowledge is what separates him from the utterly blind company men.
Then you have Marlow, the reluctant witness. He's our narrator, our filter, our moral guide. He's a skeptic, a sailor, a man of action forced into introspection.
He witnesses the corruption, but he's also drawn into this strange, unsettling kinship with Kurtz.
And that kinship comes from shared experience, mutual suffering through illness, and the sheer intellectual force of Kurtz. Marlow is forced to choose who's the better man. Kurtz, who is absolutely evil but saw it in the end, or the manager, who is just empty and petty.
And Marlow chooses Kurtz because he was at least authentic in his damnation.
Marlow doesn't become a monster, but he is forever changed. He carries the weight of that knowledge, the terrifying, essential truth of the human heart. He returns, but he can't integrate back into the trivial society he left behind.
He's a ghost walking among phantoms.
And we have to revisit the chief accountant. He's ironically one of the most terrifying characters in the novel, the man in pristine white, a beacon of order who is completely immune to the horror. He embodies bureaucratic evil.
He's not driven by malice, but by chilling, total indifference. The human suffering is merely noise that interferes with his sacred bookkeeping. His character proves you don't need malice or monstrous passions to perpetuate evil.
You just need institutionalized indifference and the cold prioritization of numbers over human lives. He represents the necessary blindness of the system.
And finally, you have the manager and pilgrims. These are the hollow men, defined entirely by their lack of any substantial qualities, moral, intellectual, or otherwise. They are incompetent, plotting, petty, and cowardly.
They despise Kurtz, not for his savagery, which they would happily imitate if they had the courage, but for his overwhelming, undeniable success and power. They lack the scope for either magnificent genius or magnificent evil.
They are the background noise, the administrative mediocrity that nonetheless facilitates the vast catastrophe. They are the epitome of moral emptiness.
You know, for those who appreciate the craft of writing, Conrad uses techniques that make the story feel so unsettlingly layered and psychologically immediate.
The frame narrative is one such stroke of genius, starting and ending on the tranquil Thames.
It creates an immediate sense of detachment, allowing Marlow to pull listeners from their comfortable present on the river and immerse them in the trauma of the past. It makes the tale feel like a ghost story told in the darkness.
But more than that, it suggests that the darkness Marlow found in Africa is universal, a potentiality that exists even on the calm, civilized waters of the Thames.
And Conrad's style itself is famously impressionistic. The language is often vague, dreamlike, and circuitous, filled with suggestive descriptions rather than straightforward sentences.
Which mirrors Marlow's psychological state. He's relating events he only semi-comprehends, events that defy linear logic and rational understanding. The language reflects the unraveling mind.
The symbolism of geography is incredibly rich and dense. The river itself is a living character, a coiling, serpentine entity that acts as a time machine, pulling them back to a prehistoric primal state.
It is the artery of the exploitation, but it's also the path to truth.
And we return to the thick white fog that descends on the final approach. This is so much more than just weather.
It's the physical manifestation of moral blindness, the willful ignorance and self-deception that allows the company men and European society as a whole to ignore the brutal human cost of their greed. Evil thrives in that opaque, silent blindness because people choose not to see.
And we have to re-emphasize the power of voice. Kurtz's voice, eloquent, resonant, captivating, is the ultimate symbol. It represents the beautiful lie of civilization and progress.
The immensely persuasive rhetoric that Europe used to mask its monstrous intent. It's the voice of immense potential, now serving absolute depravity. The power of words is shown to be just as dangerous as the power of the spear.
And of course, the famous quotes, "Whited sepulchre," immediately establishes the central theme of hypocrisy.
The Faithless Pilgrims is a deeply ironic title for these greedy men aspiring to a false material holy quest for ivory.
But nothing carries the weight of Kurtz's final verdict. The horror. The horror. It's a moment of literary lightning, an unflinching self-judgment that gives the novel its profound psychological power. It echoes long after the book is closed.
So when Heart of Darkness was published in 1899, almost a decade after Conrad's traumatic journey, it was published in serialization and then as a short novel.
And it was recognized as a powerful piece, but its true cultural and historical gravity really only grew over time.
Initially, critics didn't treat it as a straightforward political tract condemning colonialism. Instead, it was viewed primarily as a profound personal exploration of moral corrosion and psychological darkness.
It was considered groundbreaking for its modern interior focus on the disintegration of the human psyche. That's what cemented its place in literary modernism.
And the fact that it chose to focus on the psychological rather than the purely political cemented its place as a classic. It asks fundamental questions about human nature, about the limits of human morality when tested by absolute freedom.
Questions that transcend the specific historical setting of 1890.
Exactly. It's psychologically terrifying in a way that mere condemnation of political policy is not.
However, today, its view is immensely complicated by the unassailable historical truth of Leopold's Congo, which was confirmed and documented in painful detail by official inquiries and public outcry in the early 1900s.
And the enduring drama, the sheer cultural gravity of the book is magnified tenfold by the knowledge that the narrative is rooted in a historical tragedy that claimed 10 million lives.
When you read it with this context, every scene, every description of suffering, every mention of the agent's callousness, it reads as fact, not just allegory.
It becomes a crucial, if allegorical, document of a massive historical atrocity that was actively ignored by the world at the time because it was happening far away and under the guise of civilization.
It is viewed now as an essential piece of the literary canon for its structure, its style, and its deep thematic exploration.
But also as a necessary tool for understanding how industrial-scale cruelty can be deployed and simultaneously disguised by corporate and political rhetoric.
While the novel has seen many direct adaptations, its profound influence lies less in faithful translation and more in the adoption of its central structure and theme: the journey upriver to confront the ultimate truth of civilization's collapse.
The novel is the quintessential descent narrative. The idea that the ultimate destination is not some external goal, but a confrontation with the true self. That structure has been adopted endlessly.
And the most famous, albeit radically altered adaptation, is Francis Ford Coppola's 1979 film Apocalypse Now.
Right.
Coppola transported the setting from the colonial Congo of 1890 to the Vietnam War era, transforming the quest for ivory into a mission to terminate with extreme prejudice a rogue U.S. colonel, Kurtz, who has gone insane and set himself up as a god.
And that adaptation brilliantly illustrates the timelessness of Conrad's themes. It shows that the mechanism of corruption, absolute power, lack of oversight, the hypocrisy of a civilizing mission can be perfectly mapped onto 20th and 21st century conflicts.
The monstrous potential of the highly educated, idealistic leader who goes over the edge remains terrifyingly real.
Heart of Darkness explored that gap between noble rhetoric and savage reality so completely that it provided a necessary blueprint for understanding how systems operate under stress. It continues to inform everything from modern political analysis to psychological exploration of trauma and isolation.
That terrifying monster that was once a man of high ideals, that psychological exploration is why the novel remains absolutely vital today. Reflecting on all these sources, especially the historical material, what struck me most is how the context it changes everything.
It absolutely elevates it. Reading the book, knowing the detailed reality, the specifics about the severed hands in baskets, the role of the force public, the sheer scale of the 10 million deaths, it transforms it.
It ceases to be merely a story about a mortal adventure and becomes an urgent, painful document. The horror isn't philosophical.
The horror is statistical, systematic, and entirely man-made. It hits differently because we are no longer talking about a vague colonial blunder, but a calculated act of resource extraction fueled by mass murder.
So for you, the listener, if you read or reread this novel, I would advise you to pay attention to the moments of jarring, immediate contrast. Focus on the pristine white linens of the chief accountant versus the human wreckage in the grove of death.
That contrast shows that evil isn't always chaotic. Often it is sterile and bureaucratically managed.
Also, focus on the contrast between the magnificent, resonant voice of Kurtz, representing the beautiful idea of progress, versus the silent, gruesome reality of the severed heads on the fence posts. Those contrasts are the true heart of Conrad's devastating indictment.
They are the gap between rhetoric and reality.
What Conrad is really showing us is that the decay doesn't just happen deep in the jungle. It starts back in Brussels, in the quiet funereal offices where people are knitting black wool and measuring skulls.
The sickness is systemic. It's baked into the noble mission from the very start. The journey upriver is just the process of tearing off the mask.
Which brings us to our final provocation. The central question Marlow's story leaves hanging in the air. Marlow chose the necessary lie, the lie to the intended, to protect the fragile, beautiful illusion of civilization.
He chose comfort over devastating truth. He decided that some truths are too terrible to integrate.
So we have to ask ourselves, how many civilized lies do you accept every single day about your politics, your consumption, your history, to keep your world stable, comfortable, and functional?
We've all journeyed up that river with Marlow tonight, confronting the darkness within the system and within ourselves. Look around, look inside. Have we really come back?
Or are we still sailing on that serpentine river of self-deception?
That is the ultimate, inescapable question the darkness leaves us with.
This deep dive has been a heavy but I think essential conversation about confronting the historical atrocity of Leopold's Congo and the relentless, terrifying darkness that lies within the human heart.
Thank you for sharing this journey with us. We hope that understanding the truth behind this novel transforms your perception of it, moving it from a literary classic to an indispensable historical document.
We encourage you to continue exploring the lessons of great literature and history, and to never settle for the surface-level explanation.
Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood and applied, especially the difficult, uncomfortable truths.
Until next time, keep digging into the sources.